One by one, we started to kind of drop like flies after a few years of exposure to high levels of biotoxins. Our family has a genetic susceptibility to not being able to recognize and clear biotoxins properly. These biotoxins come into our body, and 24% of us, roughly, have certain genetics where we don't recognize these biotoxins as foreign. And so we don't create antibodies to them to usher them out of the body.
Maybe you have never heard of chronic inflammatory response syndrome, or CIRS. Maybe it is top of your mind all the time because you know someone who has been diagnosed or you have been diagnosed with CIRS. In this episode, our guest, Jenny Johnson, is going to guide us to a better understanding of CIRS.
84 million Americans are walking around with this susceptibility. And the EPA estimates that about 50% of buildings are water damaged. So we'll be really conservative and say each one of those people only goes into one building a year. Let's say they're home. So then half of them, 42 million Americans, are walking around with CIRS, and it's maybe being expressed or maybe misdiagnosed as.
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms.
Hi, and welcome to the next Live Beyond the Norms Health and Longevity podcast. In this episode, our guest, Jenny Johnson, is going to guide us to a better understanding of CIRS. A little bit about Jenny. Her undergraduate degree is in biology from Duke University. She has a master's in physical therapy from the University of Colorado, Denver. She has taken so many healing certifications, including breathing, the biology of trauma, surviving mold, the Shoemaker protocol, the Bredesen protocol, heart math, to name a few of them. She is a faculty member of the CIRS Institute. Jenny is a visionary leader in the field of regenerative and personalized medicine and a key voice behind Salugenics, a cutting-edge health company focused on optimizing cellular function and extending health span through innovative diagnostics and regenerative therapies. Jenny, thank you for joining us today.
It is an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Chris.
You're welcome. So I'm excited about this. Before we jump into your area of expertise, I want to go further back, like much further back. What was it like growing up, little Jenny? Where did you grow up? What were your parents like? If there was some event or someone you could pinpoint as the reason you would ultimately become a health practitioner, a CIRS expert, what or who would that be?
Oh, great question. Little Jenny, I grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Amish country. When I went off to college, everyone assumed I was Amish just because I was from Lancaster County, but I actually grew up in the city and had a wonderful childhood. I have no complaints, loving family, healthy lifestyle, all that good stuff. I did have a sister with chronic health issues, and I think that was probably my first exposure to, wow, not everybody has the easeful life that I get to enjoy. And so living alongside of her from, forever, early age, infancy, really, she was struggled more with immune system issues, energy issues, chronic fatigue, infections, some of the things that we're seeing a lot of now. This was 50 years ago, and watched her kind of navigate that. And there weren't a lot of resources. So that was part of my upbringing. And then on top of that, our family, we brought in a lot of kiddos from overseas who had like orthopedic issues that they couldn't get fixed in their own countries. So they would come over to the US, stay with a foster family, have surgery, and then go back to their own country. And we were a foster family for these kiddos. So I got to see kids with, missing limbs or cleft palates, cleft lips, things like that, and would take them to physical therapy after their surgery. And I got fascinated with kind of health and wellness and physical therapy from an early age, watching these kiddos go through that. And that really informed my profession. As you mentioned, I became a physical therapist. So interestingly, I'm a pediatric physical therapist, which is well informed by, that background. but have always been interested in chronic health issues too, because that's what I watched my sister go through. And so my professional journey has really been a balance of both. And it was when our family, my immediate family, ended up going through some chronic health issues about 10, 15 years ago that it became even more poignant.
Yeah, we'll get into that. If you're comfortable sharing, like, did they ever figure out what was going on with your sister, or maybe you ultimately ended up helping her, kind of with your background now?
Yeah, it is a work in progress. We actually are going to see a new specialist in a week and a half. I'm going to go with her. After it's been so many decades, there's a lot of unraveling, but I think with so much of the information that we know now, we can kind of put those pieces together and say, I think this is what happened early on. These are the genetics that were at play. These were the exposures that were at play. We didn't know what we didn't know at the time. And now here you are decades later, but let's see what we can unravel. And I mean, hopefully she's got another 50, 100 years ahead of her where she could feel great and that this was just a faulty beginning, maybe.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah.
So your original degree, biology,
Yeah.
master's in physical therapy. What were your plans with those degrees? And did your adventure, the one you call the Great Experiment, how did that fit into those plans?
Yeah. Well, my plan was to be a pediatric physical therapist. And, again, a lot of it was from my exposure in childhood. And I did that. And I loved that for about 15 years. And I was working in schools and in babies' homes, working with kids with developmental disabilities and with their families, helping them learn how to crawl and walk and sit and be functional, access their education in schools and whatnot. And I was doing that. I was going to a lot of homes and a lot of schools, indoor environments that I didn't realize at the time that I had a genetic susceptibility to maybe not tolerating poor indoor air quality as well as the next person. And I noticed that over time, the days that I did go to work, and especially in certain buildings, I would come home and have to crawl into bed. And I was like, gosh, I guess I'm not very hardy here. I can't handle, just working with babies all day long. I guess they just take it all out of me. But it was about 10, 15 years ago when our family moved to this little, what we had turned into an organic farm. It was really a patch of land. It was a cabin in the woods that we bought in North Georgia. We cleared the trees, we created a pond, and we brought in tons of quality organic soil because we knew how important soil was to the health of an ecosystem. Brought in tons of soil, created this organic pasture for goats and chickens and guineas and ducks. And our goal was to see if we could live in harmony with the land and if we could create this healthy ecosystem of quality soil that would grow quality, healthy plants so that the chickens and the goats and the guineas would eat those plants and then they would give us quality eggs and meat. And then we would put our waste, our compost back into the soil, and it would just be kind of this beautiful regenerative system that we would get to be a part of and a steward of. And that was really cool for a few years. And we realized the hard way that it's hard for humans to be a part of a healthy ecosystem because I think we've become so detached from what that even means. So we had our house, a structure with drywall and lumber set up in the middle of this ecosystem that got a ton of rain. And, there were just microbes everywhere in our compost bins. And so we were trying to live sustainably, but in this man-made structure with AC and indoor plumbing. And it just didn't go well for us. We ended up with exposure to what we call, water damaged building or sick building syndrome. Our home ended up becoming elevated in mold and bacteria from the ingress of stuff from the outdoors and from the water damage in our roof and, faulty HVAC system and things like that. And my husband actually contracted Lyme disease or a bunch of ticks in the pasture. That was a biotoxin exposure for his system. And again, our family has a genetic susceptibility to not being able to recognize and clear biotoxins properly. So one by one, we started to kind of drop like flies after a few years of exposure to high levels of biotoxins. And this was kind of, the origination, I guess, of our immediate family's experience with chronic illness. So what is chronic inflammatory response syndrome? our chronic inflammatory response to these biotoxins that we're exposed to on our little sweet organic farmstead.
So I think a lesson, and maybe it bears repeating, is that Mother Nature is not forgiving, right? Like Mother Nature is what it is, and
Yeah,
that's the end. So you stopped this great experiment, I think, in around 2016, and then 4 years later,
yeah,
pandemic hits. Like this, I was just kind of doing the math. First, how much did you
yeah.
miss it when you left? And maybe not at all, right? Given the experience that you had. And then did the pandemic, it feels like the perfect time to be in isolation during like, did you go, oh, we should still be there? Or like, what did that look like?
Yeah, yeah, really good question and good point. It was kind of traumatic leaving. We loved this lifestyle. It was so satisfying to have my hands dirty, to be planting seedlings and to be out there checking on the plants every morning and letting the chickens out and watching them enjoy the pasture that we had kind of built for them, watching the ducks waddle down to the pond that we had dug for them. There was so much satisfaction in that. And we were close as a family. We were homeschooling our kids. They were running the little farmers market, selling the eggs and the produce. It was really idyllic. We got the tree swing, just everything. So it was kind of traumatic to leave when we weren't quite ready. We loved the lifestyle. But we had actually had a doctor say, look, your genetics are not compatible with this way of living. There needs to be some kind of change. You need to compost differently. You need to shower before coming inside. You need to build your house differently. It's going to be just radically different. And so we made the decision to move to a locale that was more conducive to our genetics. But it wasn't easy. We really missed that. I think part of it was existential almost. We felt rejected by nature in a way. Almost like we couldn't play in nature's sandbox. We got kicked out of the very ecosystem that we had kind of created. And it said, you know what, you're not welcome here. Like,
This is not for you.
yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, we got kicked out. Like it was doing better kind of without us. So there was kind of like oh man, I guess we're going back to the suburbs. We couldn't hang, with the soil and the microbes.
Well,
So
I
yeah,
think, yeah, go ahead. So,
I was going to say then the
and then
pandemic
pandemic
hits.
hits.
Your question about the pandemic. Yeah. So 4 years later, the pandemic hits. And, I guess in a way it was kind of nice. We had moved to a house that had really low mold levels, and the type of sampling that we were using. It was a healing home for us. And we all healed pretty quickly, like within a year of moving and getting on some treatment and doing some supportive therapies. And we just felt so grateful to have our health back. And then when the pandemic hit, it was like, oh, now you just stay here and keep doing this. So in a way, it made it easy to build that capacity and resilience because we weren't expected to now go get a job in this office and go, your kids go do all this stuff, which our systems may not have been ready for all of those exposures and kind of challenges yet. So we got to build resilience and capacity because of the pandemic. And I actually built my practice. I work from this room in my home, which makes it really easy. And everyone learned how to use Zoom. So in a way, it worked to our advantage to hole up for a little while before coming back out.
That makes sense. All right, let's jump into chronic inflammatory response syndrome. I think you've touched on it a little bit already, but what is it? How common is it? What causes it?
Yeah, excellent question. So chronic inflammatory response syndrome is a term coined by Dr. Richie Shoemaker in the late 1990s. And essentially it is a medical condition that ensues when our body is not able to effectively suppress, kill, or remove biotoxins that it's exposed to. And those biotoxins are usually airborne, like mold exposure, bacteria from indoor air quality, buildings that may be water damaged. It can also be from tick-borne illnesses like Lyme disease. It can be from waterborne issues, blue-green algae in stagnant ponds. It can be from ciguatera and Pfiesteria, other waterborne contaminants that we can be exposed to from swimming in certain lakes, estuaries, eating certain fish. So these biotoxins come into our body, and 24% of us, roughly, have certain genetics where we don't recognize these biotoxins as foreign. And so we don't create antibodies to them to usher them out of the body. So that's our adaptive immune system is not functioning properly in relation to biotoxins. So these biotoxins hang around. They don't get put into our natural detox pathways. And so they hang around, they embed themselves in cell membranes of various tissue types. And our cells don't like that. And so our cells can tell that something is disrupting the cell membrane. And so our innate immune system, the part of our immune system that just pumps out general inflammation, starts going nuts, so thinking something's wrong, something's here that's not supposed to be, let's kill it. Well, toxins aren't alive or dead. They are byproducts of bacteria or mold, but they in and of themselves are just toxins. So the inflammation doesn't kill anything, it just creates more disease. We know that chronic inflammation is the root of so many problems, whether it's cognitive issues or, mood issues, cardiovascular issues, diabetes, bone health. So many things are related to chronic inflammation. But chronic inflammatory response syndrome presents as a multi-system, multi-symptom condition because it can impact not just our gut, but our lungs, our brain, our skin, our mitochondria. It really impacts so much of our body, so many systems, that people start to develop wonky symptoms. There are labs that can help us figure out what's going on, and there's an evidence-based treatment protocol to help us reverse those things. But it's pretty scary. You asked how many people may be affected. So 24% of the population we know has the genetic susceptibility. That doesn't mean they have CIRS. That just means they're susceptible. They have the genetics that once primed or upregulated, they're not going to make the antibodies properly.
So 24% of people, if they decided to go on the great experiment, might have a similar experience as you.
Right. Yeah. So we know, so that's about 84 million Americans are walking around with the susceptibility. And the EPA estimates that about 50% of buildings are water damaged. So we'll be really conservative and say each one of those people only goes into one building a year. They're home. Let's say they're home. So then half of them, that would be 42 million Americans probably are walking around with CIRS, and it's maybe being expressed or maybe misdiagnosed as chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, autoimmunity, migraines, other things that are manifestations of a deeper issue that is actually fixable. So this is more than, just as a comparison, there are about 37 million Americans who are diagnosed with diabetes, 17 million diagnosed with cancer. I just said 42 million are probably walking around with CIRS, CIRS, and may or may not know it. So it's a really big public health issue that is coming online. More and more people are becoming aware of it. But a lot of people still don't know that there's a root cause for their symptoms that's treatable.
So I've got a couple of questions. So one is, 24% of people kind of their bodies don't recognize these toxins, right? Is it because they look like something natural? Like what's the mechanism? Why do we understand why they don't recognize it? Or are we just no, this gene doesn't recognize it?
Yeah, that's a good question. It has to do with faulty antigen presentation. I don't know the mechanisms of how exactly that's happening, but we are not presenting the antigens properly on the antigen presenting cell. And so it's not so much that there's mimicry of something else, but it's just a faulty adaptive immune system on our HLA-DR.
And so for the not 24%, right? So the remaining whatever 76%, their bodies recognize these as biotoxins, and then what do their bodies do that is different that these 24% are not doing?
Yeah, well, they can create an antibody to that antigen, to that toxin or that foreign body, and then it eventually gets put into the detox pathways and flushed out through the stool.
So it just happens to recognize it, can throw an antibody on it, and then that tells the system that we need to get this out.
It's attached as a complex, which then gets flushed out through the stool. Yeah.
Does that involve the bile pathway at all, or so one of my questions is always, people talk about detoxing substances, and these detoxing substances often are like activated charcoal or diatomaceous earth are not small enough to get into your bloodstream. So if you've got
Yeah.
these biotoxins in your bloodstream and you've just got these detox things that are just going through your intestines, how do these meet up? How does the body how do they actually help if they're not getting into your bloodstream?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I don't know that I understand the full answer of how the binders are working. You're right. The pharmaceutical binders that are recommended and evidence-based in the Shoemaker protocol are staying in the gut. So we take, like say it's cholestyramine or Welchol, we take them by mouth, but they do work in the gut. So they're bile acid sequestrants and they bind to bile acids. The bile acids are bound to the toxins. And so the cholestyramine is attracted and its positive charge is attracted to either the negatively charged bile acid or sometimes even the negatively charged biotoxin themselves. But they are attracted to each other as a complex, and then that can be excreted through the stool.
Okay. Yeah. Because because I had that long question. I had a good conversation with somebody talking about the bile pathway, which is a pathway between intestines and bloodstream. And so that's at least one of the potential ways.
Right, that the bile acid is maybe going out and grabbing those mycotoxins, not so much the binders, but then it brings it into the gut where the binder's waiting for it.
Well, readily absorbs it
Yeah,
and gets it out of the system. Yeah.
right.
How would you compare and contrast CIRS to conditions like chronic fatigue or
Yeah.
I always say the fibromyalgia. Hey, I think I got it
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So I think those conditions they've been recognized or at least around. People have been talking about those for quite a while. CIRS is newer. And in my opinion, in the opinion of many of my colleagues, it is likely the cause of CFS and fibromyalgia, which are really, if you think about it, they're really more symptoms. There aren't objective criteria. These are clinical diagnoses, meaning CFS and fibromyalgia are diagnosed based on symptom presentation, objective findings. What the patient explains that they're feeling and for how long and how badly. So chronic fatigue syndrome just means tired for a long time, right? Chronic
Yep.
fatigue, and fibromyalgia means muscles hurt. Those are two of the main symptoms of CIRS. And so it's very possible that CIRS is the underlying cause of both of those conditions. There's a lot of overlap.
I've heard like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, 2 times, but not very easy. Are diseases of elimination, right? Like we've just
Yeah,
eliminated
yeah,
everything else. We believe you that you're super tired. We believe you
sure.
that you're in pain, and so this is the title.
Yeah,
It's kind of why I asked. I thought it might be related to
yeah,
CIRS.
absolutely.
What's the most common trigger of CIRS?
Water damage building exposure. And so that is right there, a toxic soup of maybe 36 different inflammagens. Mold and bacteria would be the biggest, and microbial VOCs, which are basically like mold farts, volatile organic compounds that are exuded by microbes. It's more like a gas. But yeah, 80% of people with CIRS have been induced by exposure to a water damaged building.
And the diagnosis is probably similar to this kind of elimination. It's just you've got this, you've had it for a long term. I think I read somewhere that you have to be presenting like 6 different things, or there's some number of collection of things that you have to be displaying in order to be diagnosed with CIRS.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things that's a little different between CIRS and fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue is there's both subjective aspects, like what is the patient experiencing, what symptoms do they have and how many, and then objective findings. So we also need at least one, if not 4, objective findings. So specifically, there's actually diagnostic criteria that are formal and evidence-based. So one, there needs to be known or expected exposure to biotoxins. That's pretty easy, knowing about 50% of buildings are water damaged. Someone's probably gone into one of them.
You
But a
could
lot of
almost
people,
assume that, right? Like
right, right.
you just say, okay, we don't even have to know, that's a big old check
Yeah.
mark.
But you know what? It's still helpful to ask because I think for a lot of people, it's kind of an aha, like when did these symptoms start? Well, It's around the time that we moved to that house, or, we went on this vacation, or we renovated, maybe something got stirred up, or my kids started a new school. Lots of times there wasn't an environmental kind of starting point. And so that can be helpful to know. Or again, sometimes it was, I ate this fish on vacation, and that might have been from the, a ciguatera poisoning, or I had this tick bite, so we know that there was likely an exposure. So known or expected exposure, and then symptom presentation. You mentioned the 6 symptoms. There are these different clusters of symptoms that Dr. Richie Shoemaker put together that look kind of nonsensical, but they actually make sense because, again, we're looking for multi-system presentation. So not all digestive complaints or just skin complaints, but we need a little bit of everything. And so we want at least 8, maybe 6, but for a confirmed diagnosis, it's actually 8 different clusters of symptoms representing different body systems. So 8 different, at least one symptom in 8 different clusters, plus the known or suspected exposure, ruling out other things. So let's make sure it's not diabetes or something that's treatable, like an infection or something. So rule out other things that could be causing these symptoms. And then the objective findings. So there's the visual contrast sensitivity test. There are a bunch of blood labs, and we're not going to go by just one, like, hey, let's pull a C4A or a TGF-beta 1, and if it's high, you must have CIRS. There are other conditions, other dysregulations that can cause any one of those labs to be out of range. But if you have at least 3 or 4, plus the symptoms, plus the timeline suggesting an exposure, that's what confirms the diagnosis.
So I'm guessing that the kind of 8 different clusters is related to kind of eliminating autoimmune disease. How would you compare CIRS to a classic autoimmune disease?
That's where the labs would come into play, and probably the symptoms too, although autoimmune conditions can be very multisystemic. There are a lot of conditions that can be multisystemic, and that's where I think it's helpful then to look at the CIRS biomarkers, which involve the endocrine system, the immune system, kind of a sequelae of early onset inflammatory markers and later onset inflammatory markers or hormone dysregulations that are kind of a classic fingerprint of CIRS. There's a brain MRI that we can do that's also helpful that shows a classic fingerprint of CIRS where certain areas are hypertrophied, swollen, and other areas are atrophied. And we wouldn't see that with an autoimmune condition. And usually there are no autoimmune markers, like ANA is negative, and that's, again, the kind of diagnosis of exclusion, making sure it's not due to something else, like an autoimmune condition.
So you've already touched on this a little bit, the different kind of testing. Explain how the visual contrast sensitivity test and the labs like C4A, TGF-beta 1, and MMP9 play a role in diagnosing and monitoring CIRS.
Yeah, so the visual contrast sensitivity test is pretty interesting. That one, in conjunction with the symptom presentation, actually does have a 98.5% correlation with a CIRS diagnosis. So for people who do all of the labs and their diagnosis is confirmed with the inflammatory, all the biomarkers, 98.5, there's a 98.5 correlation with people who just do the symptom cluster assessment and the VCS test. And if they fail the VCS test in at least one eye, 98.5% of the time, they would have had at least 4 biomarkers out of range too. So there's been that comparison testing. So for some people who can't afford maybe all of the labs, their doctor might say, well, let's go by symptoms and the VCS test, and we know that's about a 98.5% chance. It's technically a screening, and it's not perfect, but it's interesting that people exposed to biotoxins tend to have, the optic nerve tends to be inflamed very early on, and we don't see visual contrast very well. So this isn't acuity, and we need to actually control for acuity. I think it's 20/40 vision that we need to have corrected. So if you wear corrective lenses, you would wear that while you take the test, at least have 20/40 corrected vision. So, but it's the ability to discriminate shadows, like slight changes between light and dark. And big picture wise, like out in the world, this limitation may present itself as like inability to like see well at night or to drive well at night, can't really see shadows very well. Or maybe they fall downstairs, like miss like the edge of a step, like the discrimination between kind of the end of a step and the next step, that light and dark. especially if it's dusk, tripping over things. But there's a very sensitive test that people can take online or in their doctor's office that will tell you whether you have, again, a classic fingerprint of a CIRS patient and which columns you get right versus which ones you get wrong, where you have the limitation in the visual contrast sensitivity discrimination.
This is fascinating, right? Like a visual contrast. Did Shoemaker like create that test? Did that test already exist? Did he just recognize, like, do you know like the
Oh
history of
man,
that?
Chris, you were asking all kinds of good questions. No, he didn't. He didn't develop it. I think it was developed by the government, like for the military or something. That's a good question. I don't know the exact history. I should probably know that answer, and I don't. But no, he just used it. He realized that it was a helpful tool, and then developed some, did some research around it to substantiate that for CIRS patients. But it was in use before for other purposes.
That's interesting, right? Like,
Yeah.
so you've got this really optic nerve test and you're aware of biotoxins and you've got these theories and you're like, let's throw this test at it. And like, that's just, they're super smart people out there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's basically a poor man's diagnosis. It's not perfect. Some people with CIRS can still pass it, especially if they have really honed visual discrimination. Like if they're an artist or a musician, they read music all day long, or they look at, colors and lines all day long. They're really, really good at discrimination. They have more capacity there to lose before they fail the test. So there's about 8% of people with CIRS who can still pass it, or well, yeah, that would be it, who still pass it, but they still have CIRS. Then they'll go on and do the labs, and lo and behold, yeah, they have CIRS.
And I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
8% of the people who can pass it, or only 8% of the people who pass it,
Yeah.
end up having CIRS. That's pretty amazing. So, okay. So now are there any kind of details that what is the TGF-beta 1, MMP9? Like what are those looking at?
Yeah, so C4A is a complement. That is one of the first inflammatory markers to get elevated when we're in exposure. So a doctor may first draw C4A, and if that's elevated, that's a sign that you may be in active exposure, either in your home or maybe it was work or the grocery store. But that elevates very quickly with an exposure, so that's more of an acute marker. TGF beta 1 and MMP9, they come online a little longer. So those are more signs of a chronic exposure. And so that's why, these different labs can kind of mean different things. So eventually we want our C4A to go down. That means we are not in exposure anymore, and we're just trying to get the more chronic markers to then come back in range. So tracking our labs over time can be helpful. Transforming growth factor beta 1 is a cytokine that can either be pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. It's our body's attempt to find homeostasis. For most people with CIRS, it is high, and it is pro-inflammatory, but it can cause tissue remodeling, which can lead to like pulmonary fibrosis, scar tissue throughout our body if it goes unchecked. And that is one of the things that when our cells are being attacked basically by biotoxins that stick onto their cell membrane, our cells, one of the inflammatory components that our cells start to pump out to kind of fight that toxin that's stuck to it is TGF-beta 1. And so that's a sign that we've got some detoxing to do. MMP9 is it's actually an enzyme that is produced. It's another byproduct of the sign that the body is struggling with this chronic inflammation. That one is interesting because it can be a sign that the blood-brain barrier has been breached. Lots of times high MMP9 is suggestive of actual brain inflammation.
Wow. So as you were just talking, kind of one question popped into my head, which is there, obviously this is a miserable condition, right? Like it
Yeah.
caused you to give up your grand experiment, right? Like that's how miserable it was. Are there implications like long term if you don't treat this and you're 4 years in, this starts to happen, or any kind of long term negative impacts?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of like one thing leads to another. There's a snowball effect as the body becomes more out of balance and dysregulated. It's a domino effect. So So additional hormones become dysregulated. One of them is melanocyte stimulating hormone, which impacts our circadian rhythm. So if we stop sleeping well, then all kinds of funky things can happen there. It causes leaky gut or perpetuates leaky gut. A lot of us already have that, but if we didn't before, and now we have biotoxin exposure, which leads to a depression in melanocyte stimulating hormone, now we're probably going to have leaky gut, which leads to all kinds of complications. And then there's like gut infections and additional brain inflammation and food intolerances. So there's this snowball effect. If this goes on for a while, elevated TGF-beta 1, like I was saying, can cause pulmonary fibrosis, which is really scary. Autoimmune conditions from just kind of a dysregulated or an angry immune system. A lot of people develop an autoimmune condition or MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, a really dysregulated immune system. People can become more and more debilitated and have less tolerance and kind of lose some of that resilience. Mitochondrial dysfunction is a big one, Alzheimer's. So as we have perpetual brain inflammation from that high MMP9 for a long time, that can be one of the reasons why our brain, as a protective mechanism, develops amyloid plaque to protect our brain from toxins and from the inflammatory molecules that are swimming around and from the microglial cells that are perpetually activated. So Dr. Bredesen's theory is that amyloid plaque is a protective mechanism. Well, then we know that's associated with neurodegenerative diseases. So yeah, the potential downline impacts, we see Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, autoimmunity, pulmonary fibrosis, let alone just the deconditioning. You know, people have exercise intolerance and poor sleep and, leaky gut, and that just leads to all kinds of bad stuff.
Hey, super quick break from the podcast. Hopefully you're loving it. This is a way you can support the podcast and take advantage of a great offer. We're offering 50% off of one of our MCT bottles. MCT is an amazing oil. Add the ESS60 molecule to it. It's even more amazing. All you got to do is leave a review on iTunes, send us a notification that you've left that review. We'll get you a coupon code that'll get you 50% off of our MCT oil and free shipping. Back to the podcast.
So a lot of the markers, I mean, that makes perfect sense. Like that's just a deterioration with time. A lot of the markers that you talk about are really inflammatory related. Do you look at like a CRP, HSCRP?
Interestingly, I don't know why. I don't know why those end up not being affected, but most people with CIRS, those are fine. It's these inflammatory markers that most clinicians wouldn't even or haven't been trained to look for that are out of range and that are not out of range in the healthy population.
Okay, interesting. So now we've figured it out, mostly from the visual contrast sensitivity test, that we have CIRS. What do we do now?
Yeah. So first of all, get in with a clinician who knows what they're doing because this is wonky and hard and confusing. You want to be in good hands. But the first thing that we want to do is get out of exposure. So, I'll tell my clients right now, you're like the bathroom sink and both faucets are running. If you are still in a water damaged building, you are accruing more toxins every day. So even if we are unclogging the drain, we're taking a binder, we're doing sauna, we're doing all these things to drain those toxins. If those faucets are still on, you're just bailing water out of a boat with a leak. Like we've got to turn off the faucets and unplug the drain. And so those are really the first two steps of the Shoemaker protocol, starting with turning off the faucets. So figuring out where are we getting exposed? Are we eating something regularly that is bad for us? Do we have an active infection like a Lyme disease that is pumping out biotoxins internally that we need to address? And again, for 80% of us, it's exposure to a water damaged building. So we can test our home, test our work, try to figure out, are we getting exposed to mold or bacteria? How do we fix that? That can be tricky. And that is step one, is fixing our exposures. A lot of people end up temporarily living outside, living with family, just desperate to get out. Like when they test their house and they find out it's really high, it's pretty scary. So do what we can to get out of that exposure. And then we take the binders, since most of us can't. We don't have the antibodies to attach to those antigens and pull them through the stool naturally. So we take the binders that can help us do that. So we take the binders, release all of those toxins through the stool. That can take anywhere from maybe 4 months to a year to get rid of all of those. And then for some of us, once we're in a clean environment and we've done a lot of detox, like our think of our bathroom sink basin now is empty, our body can find homeostasis again. And so some of those inflammatory markers, they come back into range. They're like the bad guys are gone, right? So like stand down, TGF-beta 1 and MMP9, you can go home now. So our cells can regenerate, everything comes back to normal, our circadian rhythm comes back, we can heal our gut. So some people don't need a lot of support after steps 1 and 2. For people who've been sick for a long time and have developed maybe additional complications, or their system has gotten used to certain dysregulations, it can take a little bit longer and more support to put the body back together. And so there are additional steps in the Shoemaker protocol to do that in a kind of a step-by-step manner of essentially putting that jack back in the box. The very last step of the Shoemaker protocol is to take a neuropeptide called vasoactive intestinal polypeptide, VIP. And that is what has been shown to restore the brain. And that is so exciting when somebody who's done a neuroquant MRI at the beginning of their treatment and they're told, you have 4 areas of significant atrophy. Your brain is shrinking. And they're like, yeah, I know. I feel like that. I can't, my executive functioning is horrible. I can't remember anything. I can't think. I have brain fog. And by the time they get to the end of the protocol and they take VIP spray, we can see their brain come back to normal size and they feel better. And that is huge. We didn't know that was possible. When I graduated from PT school, gosh, that was at the turn of the century. We didn't know that our brains could heal this way. So it's really exciting to see that brains can regrow, new neural pathways can come online. We can actually become healthier at the end of all of this because we've supported all of our systems.
When you walk a client through that process, that's got to feel pretty amazing. When you're looking at remediation, if I heard you properly, one thing you're tracking is the C4A, because that's like, hey, you're being exposed on a regular basis and you're hoping that to get that to drop pretty quickly.
Yep. And we can use the VCS test too. That can be a sign of, hey, if we're suddenly passing our VCS test, that can be a sign that we're no longer in exposure. So C4A, taking the VCS test, some people are tracking their symptoms, but then we can also look at objective markers on dust sampling. So some people are doing actual samples on their home to see, am I at the objective kind of threshold that is correlated with successful recovery. And we have tests for that.
And so you said a lot of the clients are, things get better when they take care of step 1 and 2, which is the remediation and the binder, right? So get rid of the exposure, get rid of whatever biotoxins are internal to the system. And then step 3, have you found that it's probably a little bit of both. Like some of it's genetic, people with more sensitivity, so it's harder to kind of clear everything out. Or is it longer term exposure tends to require more time in stage 3?
So stage 3, I don't know if you're talking about like technically stage 3 on the Shoemaker protocol was eradicating Marcons, or my version of stage 3, which is put everything else back together. But I think for both, honestly, it would be both. I think genetics and your constitution, did you have a strong constitution coming into this? Were you well until you weren't? And that was really our family's presentation. We were healthy until we were taken down. And then it didn't take us that long to regain our health. But there are other people who maybe either were sick with CIRS for a long time and didn't know it, or maybe just had a weaker constitution due to genetics, or, had already accrued other chronic illnesses like diabetes, or maybe have a history of trauma, concussion. And since COVID, we're seeing a lot of people struggling with whether it's post-vaccine dysregulations in their immune system or post-viral. So they're coming in, they had some COVID wonkiness. Their immune system's already angry from that. And then they have this water damage building exposure. Those people are taking a little bit longer to get well too. So there are some complicating factors. So it can range anywhere from people getting well within 6 months to 6 years, depending on all of those factors. Yeah.
And you said for you, it was about a year. I actually have kind of 2 questions there. One, you start presenting, I think your husband was presenting more severely from the story that I read. How hard was it to get a CIRS diagnosis? Like, did you go through a bunch of things? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah. So this was a long time ago. This is almost 10 years ago when there wasn't that much out there. We had the
Yeah.
work of Dr. Richie Shoemaker. That was about it. So we delved into his website and all of his resources. And what we did is we worked with our local PCP and our pediatrician, who thankfully were really open-minded. They're not all
Yeah. Yeah.
open-minded.
No, that is not the case usually.
And yeah, and so and this was my son, actually, it was my husband and my son who were the worst off. My husband had more of a chronic presentation because we knew there was the tick bite at play. We thought it
Mm,
was just, quote, just Lyme. But then it was when my son got very sick and had symptoms that kind of looked like my husband's, but his started on a particular day. And it was when he started school in a particular building. So his pediatrician was open-minded enough because she had done a residency or some kind of program in sick building syndrome during medical school. So she had this concept of environmental health, environmental exposures, and looking at his multi-systemic presentation, like brain issues, neurological issues, gut issues. She's like, I think there's something environmental. And it all started on one day in one
mm,
building. And she knew
yeah.
the building. And she's like, that's a bad building. I know that building. So she was willing to run these labs. And we looked on the Shoemaker website, which listed all the labs. We're like, okay, can we order these? She's like, great. I've never heard of any of them, but we'll just, be the blind leading the blind. We'll order them and see what they look like. We ordered them and then we compared the results to what the reference ranges were on the Surviving Mold website. And we're like, oh my gosh, like, are we reading this right? Like, he's way out of range. So then I did my labs and we did my daughter's labs. We did my husband's labs. We're like, oh my gosh, we have the genetics. We actually have kind of what Richie Shoemaker calls the dreaded genetics, the ones that are the most susceptible. And
Mm,
all of us, except for my daughter, had labs that were out of range. So then we consulted directly with Richie Shoemaker. We didn't have any Shoemaker doctors or CIRS aware doctors near us. And at that time, nobody was Zooming or doing telehealth. So we had a phone call with Richie Shoemaker and we had sent him all of our dust samples from our home and our lab work. And we said, what, can you help us make sense of this? It looks like we have CIRS. Are we right? And he's like, yeah, 3 out of 4 of you actually meet the diagnostic criteria. And then he kind of guided us over the phone on what to do. We ended up working with a functional medicine doctor who had not been trained in this, but kind of knew about it and was willing to kind of take us through the protocol. And we had the book, and we were literally like, "Okay, it looks like looks like we're supposed to do this next. Are you cool with that? Yeah, I'm cool with that." Luckily, now there's so many doctors who know more than
mm.
I and my functional medicine doctor 10 years ago as we were kind of piecing it together. But it was enough for us. It worked, and I'm forever grateful to this day for the work of Dr. Richie Shoemaker because it got my husband off of disability and out of bed. It actually reversed not only my son's acute symptoms of the cognitive issues and the diarrhea and the panic attacks and the lung problems, but it reversed his autism presentation that he had had since birth that we just thought was him. We didn't know that any of that could be changed. And we had done the diet, all the typical things that, families of neurodivergent kids are trying to do. Let's get off gluten and dairy and, do sensory integration activities. Yeah, we had all of that dialed in, but it wasn't enough. Getting out of mold completely changed his personality. And he's now a thriving college student and well liked by his peers, academic athlete. He overcame so much. And so there's so much gratitude I have for doctors who are pushing hard in this field.
Well, a lot of what I hear in your story, and you actually even use the word lucky, is that you ended up with the right pediatrician. You were lucky to have the
Yeah.
pediatrician who had a little bit of experience in this space,
Yeah.
given the time frame that all of this happened. So were you guys on the mend before you closed down the experiment, or did you like get out of there and then a year later you were good? And did you start feeling better like immediately?
No, we were terribly sick when we left. And so we were kind of a mess. We didn't feel well. Our brains weren't working well. Our nervous systems were really jacked up. We just knew that we needed to get out. We had tried remediating our place, but we made every mistake in the book. And when we realized that we had kind of made a mess of things and we realized that all of our genetics were not really compatible with the environment we were living in, we were like, let's just go. but we didn't do it beautifully or perfectly, and we were sick when we did it. Our Dr. Shoemaker actually told us at the time that we would probably tolerate binders better if we were not in exposure anymore, and we were in really high levels of exposure. Simultaneous ingress and egress, like circulation of toxins, can be pretty rough, and he was afraid that we might have an intensification reaction if we took binders while still in exposure. So we chose not to take binders until we were out. So we were really motivated to get out. So once we got out, we actually moved to Colorado, found a clean house, and actually we got into a VRBO first. We couldn't just find a house to buy. Found a VRBO, camped out there for about 3 months, and we got on the low amylose diet. We took the supplements, we did the binders, we slept a ton, we drank clean water, we got in the sunshine. We took a break from work and school. It was summer. And that was huge. Not everybody can do all that. We have help from family financially. The timing worked out for the kids to be off school. We had a little bit of savings, not much, to be able to just take a chunk of time off and focus on our healing. Then we did find a clean home to purchase. We moved into there, and then it probably took another year to really, put all the pieces back together. There were different things that each one of us, had kind of hanging out there that took a little longer than the other symptoms to come back. But that's what really got me excited about the longevity field and the wellness field, as I started realizing so many of the things that I had taken for granted, like sleep and nutrition and stress management, and like just taking care of our inner terrain. I hadn't really, like, I kind of thought that was, well, yeah, of course, sleep and nutrition are important. I didn't realize just how important those things were until I got serious about them. And it took my recovery, and it's like putting the foot on the gas. That's what really took us beyond 100%, is getting interested in some of the terrain work and the lifestyle medicine and mindset.
Yeah, when you were even just first talking about remediation and like moving out with family to get out of the house, like these are major things. Your company's Salugenics, right? Am I saying that right?
Yes, salugenics. Yep.
Salugenics. So
Yeah.
I have to imagine that some of what you're doing at Salugenics is physically and emotionally supporting people as they're going through this process. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so salugenics is a word that I personally think is super cool. You can probably figure it out. But a pathogen, something that makes us sick, right? So a pathogen or a salugen is something that creates and sustains wellness. If you look it up, you probably won't find it. I think I'm the only one or one of few using this word. Most people are preferring the word salutagen or salutagenesis. The Latin of that doesn't make sense to me. Salu is health, not saluto. That's a greeting. So, so I'm a nerd there.
Yeah.
The way that I see it, salugenesis makes a whole lot more sense for health creation. But from my family's history that a part of our illness was a genetic susceptibility. And our genes are either fixed or variable. And, if you have green eyes, you're going to always have green eyes. That's a fixed gene. But a lot of our genes are variable, that variably expressed, I should say. And they can be turned on or turned down like a dimmer switch based on our lifestyle and our environment. And what my functional medicine doctor taught me when we were getting well is this gene that made you sick from mold, that, this CIRS gene, it had to get turned on at some point to make you sick. It's a variable gene. And so any gene that can be turned off can be turned on, can also be turned down or turned off. And so I got curious about this idea of upregulating and downregulating genes related to CIRS, also related to Alzheimer's disease, which, I'm in that camp as well, and all kinds of things. So the field of epigenetics is teaching us that gene expression is in our camp, and that it's not our genes that are our destiny, but it's more how are our genes being expressed? And that's really fun to me and empowering. So Salugen-X also means well gene expression. So salugenics is it's an attempt to bring in salugens, health creators that favorably that induce favorable gene expression, so that maybe we're turning on all of our anti-inflammatory genes, down regulating our pro-inflammatory genes, all kinds of gene expressions that we can manipulate with lifestyle and environment and mindset. So Salugenics is for CIRS patients, and it's for people who just want to optimize their well span.
That's very cool, and yes, I do like the geekiness of the name. That suits
I knew
me
you would.
well as
Yeah.
well. So one last question, then I want to get to wrap up questions. I think you're using additional things over Shoemaker's kind of protocols, right? So you've got your own. Are any of these? Would we call them biohacking? Is there anything in the biohacking space that you're like all about?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. And I want to clarify, I'm not a clinician in this space. I'm a physical therapist and a functional medicine health coach. But I don't put on the pseudo doctor hat. I let the doctors be the doctor. CIRS is complicated. I don't know the ins and outs of exactly how the gallbladder works, and I don't want to mess anybody up. So I function as a coach and a consultant in this space. So I let the doctors kind of design the treatment plan, and then I support clients in understanding it and following it. And then I bring in what you would call the biohacking. So, all right, you're on this binder and you're working on getting into clean housing and you're maybe on this other medication. That's all cool. I'll help you kind of make sure to take your medicine. But let's bring in sleep, nutrition, red light therapy, nature, mindset, community, hope, nervous system support. So, biohacking can be modalities and supplements, right? It can be kind of like external agents that we take in, but it's also lifestyle medicine. It's anything that we're doing to really level up our operating system so that all of these other inputs, like the medications and the other things that our doctor is giving us, work better. It's like what I learned on the farm is that the soil health is the most important thing. And the whole farm, it's is the soil compacted or is it like loose and loamy? Is it rich and ready for those plants and seeds to go in, or is it not ready? And there's a lot that we can do to make our soil ready for wellness to ensue. And so that's really what I get excited about doing, is cultivating healthy soil in people's lives. And that can look a lot of different ways depending on what people's strengths and weaknesses are.
What would you say is your favorite biohack?
Ooh, you shared with me that you might be asking me that question, and I've been thinking about this for the last 24 hours. It is so hard to think of one biohack because there's so many. I think of them really,
Well,
I
let
think
me
in,
let me let me pause that because I
okay,
think you're addressing a question I'm about to ask. I was trying
okay,
to slip in another one, so we'll get to the wrap up questions.
okay.
Is there anything else that you think maybe I missed regarding CIRS?
Well, there's one thing I want, in case listeners are following along and wondering, hey, take me back to that remediation piece. Here is a common misstep that so many people make when it comes to remediation. And I even mentioned we made every mistake in the book. We ended up having to move. You don't have to move if you don't make the mistakes. Most remediators who are out there are not familiar with CIRS standards. And there aren't really remediation standards out there, actually. And so anyone can come in and they can spray bleach, they can cut things out, they can paint over things and call it remediation. As people with CIRS, we are sensitive to both live and dead microbes, mold and bacteria. So we can't come in and just fog and go. We've got to remove anything that's wet, anything that has visible mold or bacteria on it. And then we need to actually vacuum and wipe up behind ourselves. We can't just fog and let the little dead bits of cell wall fragments of mold spores fall to the ground and then end up getting circulated. That will perpetuate CIRS. So we need a remediation that fully removes the problem rather than just neutralizing or killing it. And that's, I want people to hear that. So yeah, biohacking, there's a lot. If I had to choose one,
All
especially
right,
related,
wait. I'll ask the question a different way and I'll give that. But here
okay.
are our wrap up questions. So our first one, Jenny, do you have a target age that you want to live to?
I do not have a target age. I love the work of David Sinclair, and I think he was asked this question, and he said, this is pretty cool, that he thinks that the first person to live to 150 has already been born. And that's pretty cool to think about. And I personally, I don't know if I want to live to 150 unless I'm feeling fantastic. So my goal is to continue feeling fantastic one day at a time. And I guess if I keep doing that day after day after day, Yeah, if I'm still feeling fantastic and I'm 100, 120, 150, take me as far as I can go. I'm more interested, I guess, in the well span than in the
Mhm.
lifespan. I don't want to feel a lack of vitality, but be 150. And I think anybody else would agree, right? So take me as
Yeah.
far as I can go as long as I'm feeling good.
So I get this is a challenge with this question is because a lot of people is like it just depends on how I am, right? Do I have mental capacity? Do I have physical
Yeah.
capacity? And so I have to press it. I jotted down 150, which might also be the answer to the next question, which is how long do you think humans can live?
I have no idea. I am not an expert like you are in this space. I lean on people like you and David Sinclair and other researchers in this space. I'm like, really? Could we really live to 150? There are some modalities, and I'm doing the things like the taking my NMN, and I'm doing the sauna, and I'm doing the alkaline breathing and the intermittent fasting, and I'm going to be looking into it's a ESS 60, some of the antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds that can really help us protect our DNA, keep our telomeres where they need to be, keep our antioxidants where they need to be, and keep all of our systems resilient and functioning well. Taking the creatine, right? I'm trying to stay strong. So, we do all of the things, and I'm in that space enough. But again, I don't know. 150 sounds crazy to me. I'll go with it, but I don't have an opinion that's any different than anybody else's.
Okay. All right. So what are 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets? Let's call them shortcuts because everybody likes shortcuts to longevity and a long health span that you would share.
Sleep.
Mm.
Sleep is huge. Anything that we can do to enhance our sleep, that's probably where I start, is let's get good restorative sleep. And people say, okay, well, that's great in theory, but I'm not sleeping. So then what are the hacks to help me get there? And so there are supplements, there's binaural beats, there's different gadgets that can help us. And of course, there's sleep hygiene. But backing up, so I wanted to give you one answer. I think sleep is foundational. But backing up, I think what's the way that I see it is the biohacks that I focus on are in one of two categories. One is building capacity or tolerance for stress. How much stress can we handle before we break? And this is where some of the cool things like, cold therapy, Wim Hof breathing, sauna, even exercise, how much strength can we handle? We're working on hormetic stresses, building our capacity to do hard things, to live outside of comfort zones. So building our capacity to combat stress, I think is huge. And then the other category is resilience. So when we do fall, how long are we down before we can get back up? And that's on a cellular level and on a macro level, right? And so we're thinking, if somebody hurts my feelings, am I in a fetal position for 4 days? Or do I have practices in place or mindsets in place where I can bounce back and have a posture of forgiveness and okayness and peace within a minute rather than, maybe a day or a week? So it's on a human level, and then it's also on a cellular level. When our cells, get maybe freaked out by a toxic exposure, does it go into a cell danger response for 2 years or 2 hours? Like how resilient are we is our system, and there are different practices that can build resilience. And so most of the practices that I teach my patients and that I use myself are either in that hormetic stress, building tolerance, or building resilience.
So I've got sleep, hormetic stresses, which would be the physical, and then mental resilience. I think those are pretty awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
What are 1 to 2 things people get absolutely wrong regarding longevity and a long health span?
I think one of the misconceptions that I'm always trying to kind of teach about is that, well, this runs in my family, or I have the genetics for X, Y, and Z. And I get really excited. And this is salugenics, right? Is that, hey, there's more power than you know. And some people don't want to hear that because I think maybe they don't want to do the work, and they'd
Mm.
really rather just sort of, give me the label, give me the compassion, give me the medication. And I'm good with that. But for the people who are excited to know that it doesn't have, that they're not, they're not just prone to whatever their genetics say they're prone to, That I think is really good news. And I love to spread that our health is in our hands and we can impact our own health. If we're working on our gene expression before we have kids, we can impact our kids' epigenetics and then they can impact their kids' epigenetics. So one of the I guess aims of salugenics is what if we all start doing this early, teaching our kids healthy living and passing on healthy epigenetics rather than unhealthy epigenetics and traumatized genes. What if we can heal ourselves and future generations and the planet with healthy living now?
So I kind of jotted down that genetics are not everything, right? Because you just don't turn it over to your genetics. Take charge of it. Jenny, how can people contact you?
Yeah, well, I have two main websites. One for CIRS patients. Most of my stuff is on Simplified Wellness Designs. That's my CIRS website. And then Salugenics, Salugenics, Salugenics is my health optimization program and my website there. So either website, there are contact forms, emails. Jenny at simplifiedwellnessdesigns.com is my direct email. I would love to talk with anybody who is resonating with our conversation today.
And any IG, any social medias to follow you on, or also Salugenics?
Yeah. So I've got a YouTube channel that is Salugenics, and that's got a lot of nervous system practices on it to regulate our stress response. And then I have a YouTube channel for CIRS patients that is called CIRS.JennyJohnson. And that is also my Instagram handle, CIRS.JennyJohnson.
Okay, excellent. And what in the near future are you excited about?
Well, I am launching a broader salugenics program for the public. Right now, I'm only offering salugenics, or up to very recently, I've only been offering a salugenics year-long program, group coaching program for recovering CIRS patients who are looking to optimize their inner terrain and maybe dial back their HLA-DR to be more maybe be able to make those antibodies to biotoxins and function like a healthy person when it comes to water damage building exposure. But I'm moving salugenics into the general population because this is for everybody. We all need a healthy inner terrain. And so I've recently developed salugenics foundations for everybody. And this is whether you are trying to recover from a chronic condition or just trying to optimize your longevity and your well span. These are all evidence-based practices. There's one tool every week that I unveil, and then we get together at the end of every month to talk about how it worked. There are different categories every month, whether it's gut health, sleep, movement, access to nature, stress management, hormetic stresses, energy, brain health. So we have a different topic every month, 4 evidence-based tools that we learn how to integrate, and it's fun. It's biohacking together, which is way more fun than biohacking alone.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Well, excellent. You can find her at simplifiedwellnessdesigns.com. That's plural, right? Designs?
Yep.
.com, and then salugenics.com. And you can find her on social media, CIRS, CIRS.JennyJohnson.
That's right.
Jenny, thank you so much for joining us today.
It has been a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Chris.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.